Welcome to another edition of the Inspired Stories podcast, where leaders share their experiences so we can learn from their successes and be inspired by how they've overcome adversity. My name is Anthony Codispoti, and today's guest is Mr. Dan Saas, managing partner at Vaco. Founded in 2002, they are a high-growth, global professional services firm providing talent solutions in technology, finance, and more across 50-plus markets. They partner with over 15,000 clients to deliver specialized services such as accounting, HR, and marketing support. Known for their innovative approach, Vaco was recently listed among America's best executive recruiting firms by Forbes. Now, Dan has been with Vaco for several years, serving in roles like partner, senior director, and director of client services. He currently guides the strategic direction of Vaco's Columbus office, that's in Ohio, while also serving as a board member for Small Biz Cares, a nonprofit that assists local businesses with community outreach. Dan's breadth of experience in staffing and his commitment to helping others make him a true leader to watch. His passion for fostering professional growth and empowering teams aligns with Vaco's mission to connect talented individuals with meaningful opportunities worldwide. Now, before we get into all that good stuff, today's episode is brought to you by my company, Add Back Benefits Agency, where we offer very specific and unique employee benefits that are both great for your team and fiscally optimized for your bottom line. One recent client was able to add over $900 per employee per year in extra cash flow by implementing one of our innovative programs. Results vary for each company, and some organizations may not be eligible. To find out if your company qualifies, contact us today at addbackbenefits.com. All right, back to our guest today, the managing partner of Vaco, Dan Saas. I appreciate you making the time to share your story.
Yeah, I'm glad
today.
glad to join you.
So, Dan, let's go back before kind of work history. And you started as a sport management major at OU, Ohio University in Athens, Ohio. How did the skills or mindset from that background later influence your leadership style in a professional services environment like Vaco?
Yeah, in the spirit of honesty and vulnerability, I wouldn't recommend my college trajectory to many. The only thing I knew coming out of school is that I didn't want to use the degree I had. You know, the opportunities coming out of OU were, the great sports management program. It was essentially a business degree with a sports focus. A lot of the entry-level opportunities out of school were facilities, ticketing, event management, none of which I really had a passion for. So, I wish going back into school I had more of a, hey, this is what I want to be when I grow up. I learned it later in life. Through some life experiences and
as most of us do.
So probably a little bit late on the finding my path or passion front, but obviously a great program, great school, built a great foundation for a lot of what I use today, and
So you were there more for the business degree, and this was kind of a subset within that business degree, and you went out into the world, and you were going to kind of find your way, and eventually figure out what your passion was. So, what is it that kind of first drew you into the staffing space?
Pure desperation. To share a little bit about my story, and this kind of dovetails or parlays back to the school front. Came out of college and really looking to find my path. I got into financial services, insurance, investments, and had my Series 7 and life and health licenses, but that's as many know, a very tough industry to break into without an established network or family member or some legacy legacy influence there. So that was here's your desk, have at it, right? And I wouldn't have bought insurance from me. I wouldn't have invested with myself, and I always kind of fought that imposter syndrome a little bit, but needless to say that wasn't much by my own doing, but wasn't the long-term fit for me. And You throw in a couple of kids out of school early, and all of a sudden, that commission only job becomes tough to swallow. So, I made a transition out of financial services actually into an accounts receivable role, heavy on the business to consumer and business to business collection side. And I remember it paid $12.50 an hour, and
Wow.
I distinctly remember feeling and asking, if I work these hours, you're going to guarantee me that $12.50, right? Because I hadn't been guaranteed any sort of income, and just the thought of being on an hourly position, as modest as it was so refreshing to have some consistency there with my paycheck. And
You'd come from a commission only environment, and yeah, $12.50 an hour, not a lot of money for somebody, might have
Yep.
had college debt. You've got a young family coming, but hey, it's something, and you wanted to make sure I'm going to get this
and I
at least.
I like to joke that I reset the company handbook on amount of overtime hours you can work. So they had to cut me off there after a while, but you go from coming out of school and really not having a path or passion to getting into a relationship at an early age, having kids at an early age, and all of a sudden your why becomes extremely clear. And so I became very, very good at business to business collections and accounts receivable, and really the ability to have those kind of professional, persuasive conversations helped and continues to help me to this day. So I take a lot out of that experience. I
Say more. Yeah, say more about that, Dan. I'm curious. Like, do you think you had a natural knack for that right out of the gate? Did you get some training? Was it just school of hard knocks where you kept trying different things 100 different ways and, eventually figured out?
I kind of had a knack for it. Being able to connect with strangers, you're making calls and reaching out with stressful information, right? And you have an agenda, and it's very different many times than the person on the other end of the phone's agenda. So it's where can you create that, where you can sort of put yourself on the other end of the table next to the person instead of being the adversary from the organization. And that's something I always, tried to lean into was, showing empathy, showing understanding, making sure that, I'm coming from a place of partnership that I think resonated well.
And so you found you had a knack for having these conversations, these difficult conversations, right? These people
Sure.
are in a hard position, that you're showing empathy, you're showing, support, kind of putting yourself in their shoes rather than, kind of coming at it from an attacking perspective. Did you find that this helped you be more successful in collecting funds?
Yes.
And were you commissioned
No,
on that? Like, were you incentivized?
My incentive was to be the number one person, be the top performer in my group, and with the hopes of growing within the organization. And I made some steps along the way, but it was 3 to 4 years into that opportunity when this was old school. I saw an ad on Indeed and applied and didn't know what I was getting myself into, and when it comes to staffing and recruiting, and really didn't understand what the third party model was, but I knew that I had built myself into a hell of an executor and somebody that had a high motor and a high drive and a high desire and frankly need for success. So that desperation coupled with the skills that I had learned from my previous opportunity really helped me have a pretty steep trajectory in my infancy within staffing and recruiting.
Yeah, it's interesting because what you were just saying, it surprised me that you're not financially incentivized to improve your
Hmm.
collection rate, at a company like that. But I think it said a lot about your character, that because I could see a lot of people just, kind of collecting the 1250, kind of going through the motions and, making the calls and, checking a box. But for you, it was like, no, like I want to be genuinely good at this. I want to build my skill set. I want to prove my worth to the company. I want to advance myself and advance my career. And at some point, maybe you kind of recognized that this
Sure.
wasn't where you wanted to be forever. Maybe you'd kind of, reached the ceiling. And so you decided, okay, I'm going to respond to this ad, this in the staffing industry. And so explain what the third party model is that you weren't
Sure.
familiar with before,
Yeah.
you got
The
into it.
entire, idea of, a client reaching out to a company to help them find talent. I was very myopic in my view that, when somebody needs to hire somebody, they just go hire somebody, that wasn't much more to that, and then you sort of learn the challenges and nuances to that, and how, a good partner in the third party world can offer a lot of value and a flexible staffing option, when interim and temporary help was needed. So, I kind of learned as I go and learned as I went, excuse me. But, you know, certainly believe in the model and the value that it offers. I started on a very transactional, I was placing like admin assistants and, accounting clerks and AP clerks and AR clerks. And I'm, interviewing these people and sort of Googling what they do on the side and learning as I go, and then taking those folks to market. And, like I said, I did it at a very high clip, and I was able to have very strategic and conversations with people and bond with people, whether it was in person or over the phone. So, I rose through the ranks fairly quickly and into leadership.
And so, do you think, to try to encapsulate maybe what is part of Dan's special sauce, no pun intended, is your last name, do you think it is sort of that ability to have empathy and put yourself in that other person's shoes? Is there more to it than that? Like, if somebody's like, wow, Dan, like, it sounds like what he's doing is pretty cool, I'd like to do that. Like, how can I sort of develop or evolve those
Sure,
skills
sure.
myself?
There's certainly a lot more to that, and um, I quickly realized and was humbled by the fact that, I'll probably never be the smartest person in the room. It'd have to be a pretty small room. But, not being too proud and being vulnerable enough to admit that, allowed me to surround myself with very bright, very smart people. I had strengths. I'm a coach. I'm a leader. I'm driven. I know how to motivate people, and I think that's just through my background of coming up through sports and volunteer coaching and things. So I felt like I had that piece sort of innately ingrained in me, but I was rough around the edges with my industry knowledge and professional knowledge. So I think my ability to be vulnerable and ask the stupid questions, even though someone at my level at the time should probably have already known that, really helped me sort of round out fairly quickly. So, it was part of the ability to have empathy, and there's some skill involved with strategic conversations, but really it's making sure that you're open to feedback and guidance from people that have been doing this much longer than I have.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think sometimes curiosity is kind of undervalued.
Yes.
Being able to approach this with not trying to demonstrate like what I know, but being curious about what can I learn, how can I grow in this kind of a situation, in this environment. So you had some stops in the staffing industry along the way before you came to Vaco. How did the opportunity there at Vaco present itself? How did you guys get
I had always had known of Vaco. They were a competitor when I was back at my previous firm. So, they were always in the periphery, but an individual that I had worked with at that time had transitioned to Vaco, and I was working out a non-compete after I had left the organization for a new role, and didn't know I was working out a non-compete. I had no plans of a pit stop per se, but he had been keeping track of me, and 10 months in said, "Hey, you want to grab lunch?" And the rest is history. So it was actually a former employee that had brought me on board with Vaco.
What was it about Vaco that attracted you? Because you probably had, I don't know, some level of comfort or security
Sure.
where you were before. Taking a new job is a bit of a risk,
Mm-hmm.
a bit of an unknown. What did you see there that was attractive to you?
It was the autonomy that I was given to build something the way I wanted to build it. So, when I came on board 10-ish years ago, Vaco was a $250 million organization, and we've grown 5x in that time. So at the time it was really, hey, what do you want your title to be? What do you want your team structure to be? Who do you want on it? And how do you plan on running this thing? So it was a good progression and step up from being in a similar situation, but everything, the lines were very clear. Decisions were made at 2 levels up, and you just had to adhere and march forward to being in a position where they said, create this. We expect it to work, but put the pieces together any way you see fit. So that was exciting to me coming in,
Yeah.
and I stepped in to lead our staffing group. Again, a very transactional AP, AR, temporary accounting, finance, and HR associates or contractors, excuse me. And at the time we had a very modest pool of clients, and we grew that by 10x, and at one point had 100 150 folks working for us just within that division. So it was exciting, and then was tapped on the shoulder to pivot over to our consulting group to run that team, and that was a huge learning experience for me, not coming from a formal accounting and finance and IT background, but I was able to get that group humming, and then eventually was asked to have oversight over all of our lines of business in accounting, finance, and IT. And that was a couple of years ago.
So I want to take
Sure.
a couple of steps back, and then I want you to kind of explain the 3 different areas that Vaco serves. But before we do that, I want to call attention to something, because you guys have obviously grown a lot in the 10 years that you've been there. That's clear. But when you started there, a $250 million business is still not a small business. It's a pretty good size, significant business. And so it strikes me as unusual that they were like, "Hey, Dan, like, what do you want your title to be? Like, how, like, you would expect that if there's 3 or 4 guys like having a beer together, like, hey, let's start a business together. Like, what do you want to be chief of? What do you want to, you don't expect sort of like picking your own title and having that degree of autonomy in a business of that size."
Well,
right?
the answer was because it was 3 to 4 guys on the back of a napkin saying, "Hey, we're going to build a business together." So that was the beginning of Vaco in a broom closet, in Tennessee. So we and still do maintain a very entrepreneurial spirit. We. And even back at the time, the company was a decent size, but every office was different. Every office leader was different. There were some offices that leaned into a certain service offering than others. So it was the organization grew by basically going into markets and saying, you know what, you do this very well. We're going to plant a Vaco flag here. And you continue to do this, whether it's a managed service offering or consulting offering or a pure staffing offering. So, Vaco looked very different from office to office to office to office. And really it was like, we're going to find top talent. We're going to get them in the right seat, and then we're going to let them do their thing. Now, eventually we got to a size, and we are at a size where, it's difficult to scale. If everybody exactly, so that's where we've really, I would say, matured as an organization, and put some parameters to, what are we known for? What's our brand? But at the time it was very loose, and this was before the time that everything was interconnected through globalized delivery, and so it was very much we had our local presence, we had our local brand, and it looked kind of similar but not the same as another office, and to kind of progress to where we are today. It was really when COVID hit, where I think the world realized that hey, people can work remotely. The sun does come up the next day. We took that opportunity to really operationalize ourselves and take advantage of the fact that, hey, just because we have a managed service practice that sits out of San Francisco, why can't we offer that in Ohio? Just because we have a consultancy out of DC, why does that just need to be a DC play? Really? So,
meaning you've got like a consulting office there, but why can't those consultants provide the service to clients all over the country?
So we really leaned into that point of creating those three lanes of delivery, being managed services, consulting, and strategic talent acquisition. And really it was the culmination of things that had always existed in the Vaco world, but it just sat geographically in a different area. So we've since enhanced and refined that massively into a very powerful delivery engine and a very broad way that we can help clients and customers solve business challenges.
So kind of walk me through those three different areas, what each of those things mean. I think the first one you mentioned was managed services. What does that
essentially
mean?
Essentially that's any business function or operation that an organization wants to outsource. So the most simple example that I can provide is nearshoring and offshoring. A company might reach out to us and say, hey, we've got a team of 10 people in AP right now. I'm looking for cost arbitrage. I'm looking to eliminate the fact that I can't hire within this group. It's not operating correctly. We'll take that entire function for an organization, put it in our nearshore location, and just provide that deliverable back to the client on a monthly basis, and it's seamless with significant cost savings. So that can be very transactional, accounting and finance. That can be mid to high level IT, and we've found ourselves in some massive projects with the likes of Google and TikTok and Netflix and
rather significant sized clients. Who are kind of the ideal fits for the managed services portion? Are they the really big companies? Could like a small mom and pop shop use you guys?
Surprisingly, and I would say the beauty of our model is in the scalability, where we do service the Fortune 1, the Fortune 10, but where we've seen the biggest growth within managed services has been in that, we'll say, 150 million to and lower, nonprofits, small to mid-sized players, where they either don't want to continue to have something sit onshore, they're looking to save money, they're looking to become more efficient. That's really been the biggest uptick in our business, has been in that small to mid-sized space.
Okay, tell me about the kind of the second pillar, the consulting. What kind of consulting are we
It's
talking
accounting,
about there?
finance, and IT consulting, and that group is very broad in how they service clients. A couple of main areas I'll provide is ERP implementation and support, um, data, AI, transaction advisory, um, are a couple of the key pillars. But essentially, our consulting group will come into an organization that has an issue that they don't have a roadmap for, they don't have internal expertise. Um, they need to rely on some pretty heavy hitters with solid accounting, finance pedigree, and know-how to game out, execute, and deliver back to that client a finished project, whether that be assisting with, a new accounting software, or maybe an organization wants to go public, providing guidance on what sort of reporting they need to have in place, or they want to go public to private, or they're purchasing an organization or being purchased. So those are just a few areas that we support through our consulting offering.
So before we talk about the third area, are your Vaco employees or your offshore or nearshore folks, are they generally confined to one of these three pillars, or do you see people, your team, kind of move in between providing consulting services or managed services?
From a delivery standpoint, we're specialized. So, okay. And that's very much intentional. From a sales standpoint, I'm having conversations with clients about all of these offerings and how we can blend and put something together that's truly customized for them. But I don't want my delivery team to be masters of none. So yep. We've put a lot of really smart people into some some pretty defined lanes from a delivery standpoint, which has been a competitive advantage for us.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. As you were talking about before, when you guys were, growing super fast, it was like, hey, you're talented, go do your thing your way. And once you get to a certain size, like, having SOPs, having standard processes, having things siloed. So it's like, I can be the expert of this domain and I don't have to worry about all of this. But from a sales perspective, obviously, you need to be able to talk about all those different functions because you don't know what a client's going to need. It's like they could have needs that fall into the different buckets, but from a delivery standpoint, it makes a lot of sense to have them siloed. So tell me, Dan, about the third one, the strategic talent acquisition and staffing.
So we provide interim, contract, and direct hire support to over 10,000 clients as an enterprise. So that can mean anything from, hey, my receptionist went on vacation it's got to leave for the next month. I need somebody to come in and man the front desk, all the way up to and including, our CFO has resigned and we need, a contract CFO, CEO, COO, senior finance resources. So we've got our teams specialized in again to focus on certain areas and so it's contract staffing, and we have a consulting offering where we essentially loan staff individuals that we've brought on full time, and then we've got a very experienced direct hire group that is recruiting full time for clients that would prefer a full time hire versus an interim or contract option.
And so the geographies that you guys cover, is it all 50 states? Is it outside
so we're
the
global.
US?
We've got 40 offices across the states. We're in Canada, we're in the UK, we're in India, we're in the Philippines, Trinidad. We do a lot of our nearshoring to Trinidad, and so.
But in terms of the geographies that you service,
from our perspective here in Ohio, we service the greater Central Ohio area. We will service Cleveland as well. We've got an office in Cincinnati, that services that area, and I would say a little bit into Kentucky. But in the States, we've got 40 offices that service every state.
And so your role now is you're head of the Columbus office. So you manage all the services coming
That's
out of
correct.
there. And so the trajectory that you sort of described for us before, and sort of the make up your own title when you come in, and then get tapped on the shoulder to move into the consulting group and all of that. That was specifically within
That's
the
correct.
Columbus region
Yes.
that you were
Yes.
making those moves. Got it. Okay. And I'm seeing here, Vaco was recognized by Inc. magazine for its growth and workplace culture. What do you think sets the culture apart from other services firms, especially with you guys being so distributed with so many different
I'd say
offices?
from a culture perspective, we've been able to maintain our entrepreneurial spirit as we've grown. Now, it's not what it was, but I've been in other firms where just the lines are so solid, and getting outside of the prescribed box is so difficult, and it limits the sharing of good ideas. It limits trying something new. We keep those lines intentionally blurred a little bit, where we want people to build something if it's a good business decision and drives value and relates to our core values. That, hey, let's we for instance, we don't have a networking group in this space. Well, why don't we build one? We don't have a quarterly women's leadership group. Well, let's build one. And hey, I've got a new idea about a business service offering. Let's talk through it. Let's give it a shot, and if it makes sense, let's go all out. So I think that's kept people engaged and feeling like they're not just a cog in the machine, and that good ideas and new ideas and outside thought is certainly welcomed and celebrated and acted upon.
I'm kind of curious, since you've stepped into sort of this managing partner role a couple of years ago, is there a particular innovative or out of the box strategy that you and your team have introduced that's really helped you guys kind of stand out in a competitive space?
When I came on board as the managing partner, I quickly discovered, there's no real magic bullet to what I was doing. I wasn't going to come up with something that was completely radical and game changing. We had an issue with execution. We're really good about talking about something we were going to do. We're really bad at actually doing it. So if there's one thing that I knew I had to fix and was passionate about optimizing, it was our ability to execute. I'm not an organized person by nature. I don't have a project manager mindset. So, for me, it did not come naturally. I'm a former sales guy that colored outside of the lines and was wheeling and dealing, right? So becoming an operational leader was certainly an area of growth for me. But I can proudly say that we've come leagues in our ability to take a good idea, do something with it, see it through, or punt, midway through if it's not the right move. But actually giving things fair shots and fair shakes, and that's been critical in our growth. I think from a service offerings perspective, our integrated ability to offer back to that managed services consulting and talent acquisition blend has allowed us to have very honest and consultative conversations with our clients, where I don't come in with an agenda. Right? My agenda is certainly to solve a problem for an organization, but it doesn't have to look a certain way. And oftentimes it doesn't. Sometimes it's a little bit of staff augmentation with some oversight from our consulting group, and some of that work may sit onshore, nearshore, or offshore, and it's all based upon what the client challenges and what they're hoping to accomplish. So I know a lot of my industry peers are coming at this through, hey, do you need a body? Do you need a body here? Do you need an extra body here? And, if the market conditions last year were as such where a lot of times that answer was no, and that conversation could never go any further. So, really leaning into an integrated blend of delivery mechanisms was huge.
It's interesting what you said about when you came in, you guys are really good at talking about what you do, not so good on the execution part. And you called out exactly where my brain went is, sales guys, they're great at sales. They're not usually good on the operational front. And there generally isn't very good crossover between those two functions. Your brain is sort of, pre-wired for one way or the other. So did you guys get a lot better because of, some of the internal team members that you had where you're like, hey, I recognize that this is something we really need to focus on. I'm going to need your help because this is kind of the way your brain works to person X, Y, or Z.
We did have a couple of folks internally with very operational focuses and mindsets coming in. So leaning on those individuals to drive things. But I put a lot of that on myself as an area of growth, area of opportunity to round myself out professionally. It's not just because it doesn't come naturally to me, doesn't mean it's something I can't do. I just have to try a little bit harder and be a little bit more intentional about it. So, I took a lot upon myself to say, this isn't possible. The idea of execution isn't, something you have or don't. It's just about, if it doesn't come naturally, you got to put a little more work into it.
I'm so happy to hear you give that kind of a response because I think it highlights something that a lot of people don't understand, and those who do understand it need reminded of. And it's this idea of growth mindset versus fixed mindset, right? It'd be so easy to say, well, I'm, Dan Saas, like I'm a great sales guy. Like, that operations stuff, that's not for me. Like, that's for somebody else. And I've got two young boys, they're 8 and 10. And I always try to think about ways to sort of, educate them and teach them of this, that you may not be great at something today, but that doesn't mean that you can't get better at it. Like we all have opportunities for growth and we can stretch ourselves into these new and uncomfortable places. And so I love to hear that, it was like, hey, it was a combination of, I leaned on some people internal that, they have sort of the background, the expertise in this. And at the same time, I told myself, hey, you're leveling up. Like I got to show up and I got to help to make this entire operation better.
100%.
Right?
And I face the same challenge with my kids.
Yeah, you have any
No, I
advice
don't.
for
It was
me?
more of a question of how you're doing.
I don't think it's sinking in quite yet. Because my 10-year-old, he's like, Dad, I'm already good at football, and I'm like, you got some skills, and if you want to get better, like you can practice. Or, oh, Dad, I'm not good at social studies, or I'm not good at language arts. And like, well, how do you get better? So no, I don't have the.
I tell you what, we could probably spend 8 hours on that topic alone. But coming from now an adult, having kids, it's interesting that overcoming adversity is such a challenge for kids these days. It's that immediate gratification, and if it's not there, it's I'm not interested. So I'm right there as well, saying you always have to be pushing yourself, striving for excellence. How can you get better? If this is indeed what you want, I'll spell the path out for you, and you're not on it. So yeah, it's.
And along these lines, we'll kind of get back to the main topic here, but I think this is kind of an interesting sidebar. As parents, like we really want to protect our kids from hardship and struggle. And, we hate to see them be hurt or sad or angry. And at the same time, we recognize that there's value in that struggle, right? Like you've mentioned, several times here, sort of the, like the learning curve that you have moving into the consulting group, the challenges of, you kind of focusing more on operational stuff to help fix your execution. Like that was hard, right? That was a struggle. It didn't come naturally to you. But, as you look back, like, what a great path for you to have taken. And so, but as parents, it's kind of hard to watch our kids struggle, even though we
Yes.
know that oftentimes that struggle is the way for them to
Yeah.
grow.
And,
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think sometimes I want to go pay my neighbor $20 to say the same thing to my kid as I've been trying to say, just so they hear it from somebody else. But I think it comes down to the reality. You don't want your kid to be punched in the face when they have their first job, and I certainly grew. Majority of my growth and advice comes from the mistakes I made, and you always want that for your kids, but I have
How to find that balance.
Yeah.
Because in parents, you go into
Sure.
protective mode.
Sure.
And, yeah. Okay, so getting back to
Yeah.
sort of the work that you're doing at Vaco, the incredible growth that you guys have experienced, is this due in part to acquisitions? Has that been part of the strategy?
Yeah, both. We've acquired and we've grown organically. We've made some business decisions that making some acquisitions was a good entry point into a certain market. That's how we got into Canada, and we've acquired some fairly sizable shops on the West Coast as well. So, but it's organic growth as well. It's really a mixture of the two.
And Vaco's a publicly traded company now?
No,
it is not. Okay, so it's started private. It's remained private. What did you say? Was it 3 or 4 guys in a broom closet on the back of a napkin?
It was a bunch of very driven, passionate, and talented individuals that decided that their current company did a lot right, but wasn't always humane, and so their goal was to take the best parts of that and strip out the BS and start a business with that simple operating model.
What do you mean the previous models were not humane?
This industry, you can get really married, and I think in any sales position, to the activity. And we always want our salespeople to, have high activity levels, but you can't do that at the expense of results. If somebody's hit their quota by 2x, I'm not going to beat them up if they're 2 meetings short of hitting their goal, because it shows me that they're spending the right time doing the right things, and their model and approach may be different than the other person. But there's plenty of shops that will make you explain those 2 meetings that you didn't hit, and what exactly you were doing with your time, and that gets abusive after a while, and especially when you get some tenure and you know how you see success, and it may not be right along the company handbook of how it's written, but you have to allow for that, or you're gonna lose talented people after they start understanding that. So we've eventually found our way into some middle ground where back to, it can't be the wild west, and we've scaled to a large organization, right? There needs to be some structure and some expectation and prescription around the amount of activity needed to succeed. That's just the recipe to how to do well in this industry. But in my opinion, taking a results first mindset versus an activity first mindset makes a lot more sense, and allows me to judge people on the right and grade people on the right things.
That makes a lot of sense. I'd like to hear more about how you personally, as well as maybe Vaco as an institution, think about recruiting, retaining team members. What have you done? Whether it's sort of your full-time internal people, whether it's offshore, nearshore, whether it's contract folks that you're placing at your client sites. What have you guys? Because it continues to be a tight labor market for a lot of folks. So what have you guys found success with in terms of finding people, sort of sifting through all the noise, and then once you've got them, like what do you do to hold on?
From an internal perspective, I want to provide every opportunity for somebody to grow into my role. and not be threatened by that. So, I'm sharing, monthly financials with, my lines of business leaders and saying, hey, what do you see here? What are your areas of opportunity? What have you learned from this? And, getting them to have ownership of a P&L and feel like they've got some stake in the game rather than just reporting a number to somebody up the food chain. And I really think that empowers leaders to take ownership of their work and take ownership of the work of their teams. And so I certainly lean into providing every opportunity for someone to grow with us. Like I said, I'm surrounded by people that are smarter than I am, so I don't fail to utilize them.
It's big and smart of you to recognize that you've got folks around you that are better at their individual roles than you are. That it shows that you're hiring correctly, right? Yeah, you're putting the right people in the right seats.
Yeah, and our attrition for our industry is very low by comparison. And I think we treat people like adults, we invest in them, and we foster growth. And I think people appreciate that. And there are, there's always this war to pluck talent from other agencies and, bring people in. And frankly, I'm never concerned about losing anybody to another agency, to another firm, because I know what we have can't be matched. At least not in the.
And you think it's mostly based around that fact that you really encourage and foster individual growth in your team members?
We provide.
You think that's
I have
part of it?
Standards, right? We have expectations as a business, but we offer a lot of flexibility to folks, and I think that's appreciated. If it's abused, we'll address it. It normally isn't, but we try to hire the people that you don't have to keep your thumb down on to produce when you look the other way. And if we've done that right, it's just about training them up in the right way, giving them the right environment to succeed, and letting them go.
Dan, what's a serious challenge that you've had to overcome? What was it? What did you learn? How'd you get through it?
I dealt with a lot on my plate from a personal standpoint over the last, I would say, 5 to 10 years. Couple that with the stresses of the job and my inherent need, if you ask anybody that knows me well enough, to try to control every variable within my life, right? Whether that be, what my kids are doing, to what an ex-spouse is doing or how they're thinking, to how's everything on the home front now, to every variable that comes up in every day business. And it was maddening, and I didn't deal with it well, and so I got burnt out. And I wasn't the father I wanted to be. I was in shutdown mode immediately after work because my cup was full, right? And I couldn't offer my spouse the attention that she needed, my kids the attention that they needed, because I was too busy trying to wrap my arms around every single thing in my life and spin those plates and keep them up at all times. And that it continues to be a struggle. I'm a control person by nature. I want to feel like I have some effect on an outcome, realizing that I still can, but I cannot. I have to let go of some of that. Whether that be through, believe in a higher power, or through religion, or however you choose to exercise that. But letting go and saying, there are things and variables in my life that I can control, but there's a hell of a lot that I cannot. And I have to be okay with that. It's going to suck because it doesn't come naturally to me to just, believe in the outcome. But it was necessary for me to sort of balance my life from a personal and professional standpoint, and feel like I could let some of that stress go. Was huge.
I think what you're touching on here doesn't get enough airtime. Sort of this, because type A, hard-driven, people like ourselves, it's both a blessing and a curse, right? Like, you're good at what you do, Dan, because you are thinking about all the details and, controlling all these different aspects that you can. But the reality of the world is that it's so complex and there's so many other variables outside of our control that you can line up all of your pegs exactly, in a straight row and, be completely prepared. And then something happens that you could have never foreseen, wouldn't have any influence on, and it completely, disrupts your game plan. You mentioned, you touched on faith. Is that something that has been an important element for you, in at least to some degree, starting to let go of this sense of trying to control 100%. Everything?
100%. And as part of a small group of some great individuals that I met with on a weekly basis. Unfortunately, schedules have gotten away from me where that's no longer always possible. But that was a big focus, and throughout a couple of conversations with that group, kind of immediately hit a chord with me that, man, you've got a stranglehold around a ton of different things, and you can't control how that person is thinking, how they're feeling, what they're gonna do, but you're sure as hell putting a lot of thought into it and allowing that to dictate your happiness and your state of mind, and you have to let some of that go. Like, you have to know you're doing the right things, but you have to know that you can't control everything, and whoever you trust or believe in or what you believe in, it's very cathartic to come to that realization. And you kind of feel like you've taken some things off your shoulders. So, not to say that it's fixed, like, that's still my mentality, and that's my default, right? Is to stranglehold, and I have to remind myself that, listen, it's impossible to do.
It's this game of constant tug of war, right? Like, that part of your brain can say, "Hey, yeah, I recognize I need to let go of things," and another part of your brain is, "Yeah, but I don't know
what
how
happens
to."
If I do,
right?
So, and then from a business standpoint, that just goes back to, bringing the right people on board, trusting them, and knowing that you've set them up to succeed, but allowing them to succeed. Similar to the path I was given coming on board, right? It's just, build this in, how you think you ought to, and we're going to give you the resources, but have the expectation that you're going to grow it and do it right, but we're going to give you the space.
Dan, let's say you and I connect again a year from now and you're celebrating something. What would that be?
We've got some pretty gaudy financial goals for our business that I think we're poised to hit, as long as our execution, and go back to that execution piece, is an A or an A- this year. So I think we've put ourselves in the place where we can hit that. That's been a big, goal from when I've come on board, to sort of hit that milestone as an office. So I hope to be, and plan to be, celebrating that, over the next year. And I would just, from a personal standpoint, is continued investment in myself, and continue growth as a professional, as an individual. I know that's not quantifiable at times, but I think it always needs to be top of mind, and something that I always haven't placed a whole lot of importance in.
Can you say more about the growth goals, either like what they are or why it is that you feel so encouraged that you can hit them?
Yeah, so we've got our budget number, and I've put our bogey about 30% above that budget number. So it's, it's gaudy. It's going to be a reach, but again, I think we're at a spot where we're doing the simple things right consistently, and we're starting to realize the power of, being able to have larger, broader conversations with clients about big ticket, big picture initiatives, that come with, big price tags and big paychecks at the end of the day. If you're taking an organization through a digital transformation or an ERP implementation, or, a very strategic and high level journey. So, having that mechanism to say, what, staff aug may be down this quarter. There may not be a lot of people bringing on contract associates. However, a heck of a lot of people want to talk about offshoring right now. Heck of a lot of people want to talk about data optimization right now. Heck of a lot of people want to talk about AI right now. Let's have those conversations.
And you feel like you've got the operational support in place to execute on those as you're striking up those new client conversations.
Our organization went through a recent brand transformation where we had a bit of a convoluted story to tell. Just going back to my earlier comment about every office looking a little bit different, and as we started to operationalize that, we were rolling out 7 different brands. This is our supply chain brand, and this is our consulting brand, and this is our healthcare brand, and this, and it just became word salad at some point, trying to introduce these to somebody who doesn't have a background in what we do. We've merged those into an entity called HighSpring, which Vaco is the talent acquisition arm of HighSpring, and HighSpring is our main delivery engine for managed services and consulting, and that's agnostic across organizations. We still have the same specializations, but it eliminates a lot of the noise in how we introduce ourselves and what we do. So that's been powerful, and that's resonated with the market.
Yeah. Dan, I've just got one more question for you, but before I ask it, I want to do 2 things. I'm going to invite all our listeners, first of all, to go ahead and hit the follow button on their favorite podcast app, so you can continue to get more great interviews like we've had today with Dan Saas from Vaco. Dan, I also want to let people know the best way either to get in touch with you personally, follow your story, or that of Vaco's.
Connect with me on LinkedIn. SAAS is my last name. Software as a service, so it's pretty easy to remember, and great icebreaker for me at times, or stupid joke, or both. And
I made one myself.
You go. Yes,
I took it the other way instead of the
pun intended.
Yes, pun intended. Yeah. Sorry. Go ahead. So LinkedIn, and we'll include the link here in the show notes.
Please, send me an email, dsauce@vaco.com. Happy to engage or answer any questions anybody may have about what we do and how we partner with clients. So, I'm certainly excited for the opportunity to share our story and my story, and hopefully it's somebody out there finds value in it.
So last question for you. I want to make sure that we talk about the Small Biz Cares that you're a board member of. What is this? How'd you get started with it? What does it do?
Gosh, I got started with Small Biz Cares. I'm a morning person, and so I think it was a Sunday, and I don't know if this show is still on. It probably is. It was like Experience Columbus or something, and it comes on at 5:30 or 6 a.m. on Sunday mornings. And so I was walking the dogs and sort of listening to catch up on current events around the city, and Naveen Bansal came on, and he's the creator of Small Biz Cares, and really he was looking for an opportunity to create a group that fosters philanthropy, that is a resource to organizations that say, hey, I want to give back. I don't really know how, or I don't have the time to organize my team into, volunteering or whatever we may want to do. Small Biz Cares provides that as that outlet and mechanism in which they can engage with to become more involved in the community, to network with other small business and small entrepreneurs, solopreneurs, as well as some mid-sized organizations. So it's been a great group to be a part of, and I think we've done a lot of good. We have quarterly events, and we're volunteering, whether that be LifeWise of Ohio, or the food pantry, or the Columbus Food Collective. So we always try to do a lot of good, and we have a scholarship offering as well that comes through that group. So Small Biz Cares.
How can folks learn?
smallbizcares.org.
We'll make sure we include that in the show notes too. And Dan Saas, I want to be the first one to thank you for sharing both your time and your story with us today.
I
really
appreciate the
it.
opportunity to be on, Anthony, and looking forward to staying in touch.
That's a wrap on another episode of the Inspired Stories podcast, folks. Thanks for learning with us today.